Welcome back to the Flyers Nitty Gritty podcast, Gettin Gritty Wit It with your host, Yariv, Wolok, and my special guest for the evening, returning guest, Colby Cohen. Colby, welcome back to the show. How you doing, buddy?
I feel honored. I get a title now, returning guest. I like it.
Yeah, went from new special guest to returning guest.
I like it a lot.
Yeah, but no, actually, I think this is a really appropriate episode, and I was thinking about this prior to, kind of coming on today. But, current state of the Flyers, they kind of get hit with a big loss, a 6-1 loss, where I don't like to say effort, but, the overall team execution just wasn't there. And this is the second time that's probably happened to this degree this year. And I thought you would be a perfect person to have on here because you've actually been there. I don't want to say you've been there where that team was exactly, but you've been playing at that level. And I think you'd be the right person to talk to as far as the mentality of something like this. So, real quick, let me just say one thing. Thank you to Jim Steaks on South, our sponsors. Jim Steaks is a Flyers fan, so make sure that everybody at Jim Steaks knows that you guys are from Flyers Nitty Gritty when you go there. They've been really happy with the support, so thank you so much, and thank you to Jim Steaks. So, real quick, to you, Colby, what did you think of the most recent 6-1 loss? What did you kind of take away from the overall performance?
Well, I also have to say this before I go in and give you this answer. I feel like you're being too kind to me because you guys owe me a call out. I'm pretty sure on your podcast, I was dead wrong about something. I even made a bet, which I lost, and I'm ready to pay up at when we can. But I do feel like since last time I came on, I about the Myers contract, I was wrong. And I don't remember the exact bet, but I know that I was wrong and that I said he would not get that. And your partner said he would, and you did as well. Yeah. And I was wrong, and I can admit when I'm wrong, and I'm happy I'm wrong because it's always good to see a player get paid. You know what I mean? I'm a big advocate of that. But I was wrong. And, I'm still, looking forward to, watching him develop and continue to earn that paycheck every 2 weeks when he gets back from his injury. So I wanted to sneak that in there because you were very gracious to not stuff it right back in my face at the beginning of the episode.
No, absolutely not. And in fairness to that, I think it was we were talking about a range of $1.5 million. And I think with the current status of the Flyers defense, it makes a little more sense why he got the money that he did, I think.
Well, you guys had the right idea on the fact that this player was not necessarily just getting paid for today. He was getting paid for what he can be. And my point was that I felt like he didn't have the leverage to get that. And I was wrong. He obviously did. Or the team really believes in him. Both are a good thing. So, anyway, so, the Bruins game after the Buffalo game. And, what I thought was really unique about the first, lopsided loss was AV was so sure that they would come back and play well the next game. And I also was sure, based on what this team has taught us over the last, whatever it's been now since AV came to town. And I was really surprised to see how things got away from them against Boston. Now, I don't necessarily think the effort thing was terrible against Boston. I think that was more execution. And I think right now you're seeing them make mistakes that are just a major lack of execution. I mean, you're seeing puck watching defensively, which, you don't need to have a system defensively to not puck watch. When you puck watch in the NHL, the minute 2-3 guys are staring at the puck carrier, on the outside of the ice, you're in trouble. Guys are just too good, too quick, and too fast. So I think that the team is sort of trying to find an identity. I think last year they really thrived on the forecheck. They thrived on puck movement. They never had to defend too much because you had a player defensively that could end the play on almost every line. And that doesn't just mean D pair because, if Couturier is out on the ice, he's going to end plays. There's plenty of forwards on that roster that could end the play. So, I think that's a big thing right now it's not necessarily D zone coverage because D zone coverage is a very broad term, right? I mean, that's sort of an easy way to talk about defense is D zone coverage. But, you're just seeing things sort of underneath D zone coverage that aren't happening, like puck watching and, you're over committing to people. Communicational errors. I mean, 3 or 4 times in that Boston game, you see 2 guys not communicating, ending up sort of covering the same guy or with their stick position, not in a very good place to influence the play really into high danger zones. So I think they're breaking down a little bit right now. And it's a lack of practice. It's a lack of preseason. I mean, it's all of those things. And, I know anybody who's listening can say, well, every team's in the same position. And look, I'm not doubting that. Every team is in the exact same position, for the most part, but every team is different, for whatever reason. So far, the Flyers have been a little up and down and they've had some issues defensively. And these are not things that they can't work out, is what I'm saying. So I'm not hitting the panic button as far as what I think the team can be later in this season, especially with some of the players that are injured.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think you hit on everything in that in your statement there. The one thing I do want to emphasize, and you did mention this, is I think it's important to recognize that yes, I do think Couturier being in the lineup, and let's include Phil Myers, and obviously we can include Frost in that, and even Ghost, which I think the team will be very happy to have him back. But missing those players, I do think, listen, it's a drawback. They're especially defensively extremely important. Couturier on both ends of the ice, and you can make the argument for Myers as well. But clearly defensively really important. But you don't think a 6-1 loss, like you said, that's not an issue of talent. That's the way I see it. A 6-1 loss, like the worst team in the league cannot lose 6-1, right? So when I see it, again, I don't think it's an effort thing. I never think it's an effort thing. I agree with you. It's an execution. It seemed like every time there was a simple play, they were making the wrong one, or they would flub a pass, or they would overpass. And what do you think it takes to kind of work through that? Is it just time, confidence, and just kind of sticking to the game plan?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's confidence. I just think it's reps. I think it's focus. The team has Nolan Patrick back. I mean, you basically brought back 2 top 6 forwards.
Yep.
And it's almost like James Van Riemsdyk has been reintroduced to the lineup. You know what I mean? I mean, he's been given a lot more opportunity this year. And it's kind of amazing how you get a couple goals early in the season, how that changes the light that everybody's looking at you in. Mm-hmm. So, you're working through that. I will say this, and I said this on TV many times last year. Mm-hmm. Matt Niskanen won't be the MVP of this team, but Matt Niskanen is the MVP of this team in the regular season. Yeah. Now, the playoffs were different. He struggled in the playoffs, which he did not adjust well to the return to play. Mm-hmm. But he was the glue last year. I mean, I'm not saying he's a better player than Ivan Provorov or a better player than Sean Couturier or whatever. But like, he to the D was what Sean Couturier is to the forwards. But
100%.
When you're missing that guy on defense, you're more exposed. You can hide forwards, but you cannot hide a defenseman. It just doesn't work that way at any level of hockey. Going back to Pee-wees, you just can't hide, a defenseman that's on the ice a lot. A forward, you can sort of bury him, you can hide him, you can protect him, get him certain matchups, but you can't do that as much with defense. And I think there's a huge gap on the back end, a huge gap, because it's not a coincidence that Provorov was as good as he was last year. I mean, of course, he's going to continue to get better, but having Matt Niskanen, that calming influence who never made mistakes. I mean, he's that guy that you put him first in your lineup because he's always going to get on base, or whatever the situation is in any major professional sport. He's that guy that you just what you're going to get every single time. He makes the 5-foot pass, and then your partner says, well, Matt Niskanen's got a ring and it's been around. If he does it, that must be the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So they miss him.
Yeah, and I think Fletcher referred to him as a maintenance-free type of player. I completely agree with that statement. Do you think internally, do you see any combinations? Like, again, we talked about Phil Myers earlier. The Flyers haven't relied on this, and maybe injuries obviously are going to slow this down. They did go with Sanheim, which makes sense to me. He's the more responsible of the defenseman outside of Provorov. But do you see Phil Myers being able to step into that role? That's kind of something I've been waiting for, because he's the only guy that I really see who plays the right side on the Flyers that could potentially fill. And obviously he's not going to do this with his age and lack of experience, but at least with the skill set, could maybe step into Niskanen's role. Is there anybody else that you see, or do you see Myers as that at some point?
Well, I love what you said when you match their skill sets. They do have very complementary skill sets. Niskanen might be a little more polished offensively, sure, but Phil Myers could get there. I don't remember what Matt Niskanen looked like at 22. So I see guys who could skate, guys who could play physical, guys who can make their skills are very similar. Besides, like I said, the polish, but that could come. And what is the major difference is the maturity levels of, making the smart play. I mean, that's still a big hindrance to his game, is that he still has those moments, those young defenseman moments. And, you really can't make those mistakes in the NHL. It's not like the American League where it's a development league. You got to get that out of your game, that blunder, that one moment in every game. It seems like no matter how well he's playing, he always has that one moment.
Right.
So the more I think about it as we talk, the more I think one day he could really play like Matt Niskanen. I think that was a really, good catch by you to talk about how their skill sets match one another. But no, right now he's not able to play that role. Like, he's not going to be your, he may be on your shutdown pair, but he doesn't have Niskanen's game yet, and he doesn't have the maturity, and that's not his fault. He's only been around the league for like 100 games. So Matt Niskanen had a lot more than that.
Yeah. Well, I think Niskanen is actually a special player and the type of player you need on your team to win a cup. I mean, under the radar, he got better into his 30s. Like most people, like you were saying about his younger years. I mean, he was traded. He struggled. Most fans don't know this, but, most defensemen, they really don't hit their prime until they're, 25, 26, 27, 28.
Yeah.
It's a mature. Exactly. Well, it's a mature role, right? It's like people assume that it's like, oh, you walk in as a kid. It's like that's 1% of the defensemen that come into the league. Majority of them develop and they get better as they get smarter. Matt Niskanen was definitely a special player. So right now we're looking at practice. The pairings that we're seeing, I believe going into tomorrow are going to be Provorov, Ghost, Sanheim, Friedman, and obviously this is due to injury, and then Haig and Justin Braun. Now there's a bunch of questions there on D, but also understandable why they're going with that. The top pairing, Provorov and Ghost, it's worked in the past. We haven't seen it. I do suspect they're going to do it in the game, at least situationally. Maybe mix in Braun or somebody else in there if they have to. But how do you feel about those pairings in general?
I'm a big proponent of Shane Gostisbehere. Like I'm a guy who still believes in his game. There's a lot of people in Philadelphia that do not believe in his game. I think that he's still a very good player. And I think that for him, he needs to build his confidence back up, but you just don't go from what he did and has done. I mean, that was not a fluke. And
Love that you said that.
He does so many things that you just can't teach. And so I think the reason he's still here in Philadelphia is because the team is scared to death that he will go somewhere else and make them look like a bunch of idiots. And I'm a proponent. I mean, it really is the best way for me to say it. Now, I'm not sure about that pair. They did that early in Provorov's career before I really covered the team.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't working at the network and I wasn't watching it as, intensely as I did.
Sure.
So I don't really have a lot of frame of reference, and I don't want to just sit here and kind of bullshit you and pretend like I do. But listen, they're both highly skilled players and they're both very smart players. So I don't see why it couldn't work. You know what I mean? I don't see why they couldn't play together. They can both use their feet to get themselves out of trouble. They both have good vision to move the puck. So I think strong communication between them will be important because they're both two guys who like to look for offense. They like to dive in. They like to get involved. But I've always been a fan of two offensive players playing together, especially when you have one like Provorov who defends well. I think Provy's a good defender. I still think he has his moments with the puck where you remember that even though he's been around for so long, he's still a pretty young guy. But I look at it and I think about, a Ryan McDonough, paired with a Kevin Shattenkirk, or, two guys that can both, do it offensively, Seabrook and Keith, you know what I mean? It's like sort of like that, guys who really can be offensive and move the puck, but can defend too, which we know Provy can. So, yep. And I think Shane can. So, I've had conversations with people, even within the organization, that, he just needs to defend with his stick and his feet. Sort of like AV mentioned, he'd like to see Gustafsson, use his stick more, use his feet more. You don't need to be overly, physical. So, I think we'll see what happens. I mean, I think people are seeing quickly that, Friedman is going to take a little bit of time. He's a bottom of the lineup type of guy, and that's no disrespect to him because he's an NHLer. And it's easy to come. It's not easy, but you get those first couple games in the NHL, your adrenaline could put you through a brick wall, and I know that from experience. I mean, then continuing to come back and do it over and over again is harder. It's why you see guys who sometimes come up at the end of a season, they're like, holy shit, for a couple of games, and then they come in the next year and struggle. It's just different. So that everyday grind versus that adrenaline rush. And, we'll have, this will be something we're going to watch. And I do think the Flyers at some point are going to have to address that Niskanen type of role. But I don't think there was a lot of options out there that were attractive to the Flyers, that they could make work from a cap standpoint.
Yeah, I think, and to that point, actually, is a perfect point, because I was going to ask you about that if you thought they were going to make a move. But I do think as the season rolls on, positions probably will be a little more clear as far as who's going to make the playoffs or not, and maybe one of those names will be available. There's an expansion draft coming, and I think that's partially why the Flyers didn't make a move. And to roll back to your initial point, and that's the thing with Shane Gostisbehere right now is, if he does have a kind of a comeback resurgence, he's at risk of getting taken. But I think Fletcher looked at his history. He had Brent Burns. He gave up on Brent Burns. He traded him. And obviously he looked, I don't want to say he looked stupid, but he didn't get a return, on that type of trade. And I think in Ghost situations, same thing. And now it's kind of this weird narrative where all of a sudden, Niskanen's gone. Everybody's counting Ghost out. And I love Shane Gostisbehere. I've always loved his game. I'm waiting for him to make a resurgence. And I kind of love what you said, because I think he's special. And I think there's a big difference between him and Gustafsson as far as the way they play D.
And totally.
Yeah, like it actually, I would hope, and this is not a hard knock on Gustafson because I didn't expect this from him, but I do hope that people can appreciate what Shane Gostisbehere brings, because he's not a guy who just passes the puck out of the zone. Like, this is a guy who carries the puck. This is a guy who's doing spin moves and all these crazy stuff early portion of his career. It's a rare gift, and I do agree with you. I think there's a risk of that if he does go somewhere else and plays on an elite power play. So that actually rolls me to my next question. You know, we have the special teams right now, and they're not looking great, PK or power play. And I would say PK was definitely a big strength. Now, you could say the injuries are an issue, but I think that, again, this goes back to the execution thing. And it's just, a lot of it is just simple plays or timing or just not moving up as a unit, which tends to be where the Flyers struggle the most. What do you think? Let's start with the power play, actually, because we were talking about Shane Gostisbehere. What did you think of the power play? Did you think, did you see anything good? Did you see anything that maybe you want to see changed or, adapted?
Well, I like that you bring Shane Gostisbehere back because you can establish a point shot. I think the very dangerous power plays in the NHL all have a big shooter, because when there's a big shooter, it's something you always have to worry and think about. I mean, when Ovi's on the ice, even when Ovi isn't the one shooting the puck, there's a reason TJ Oshie is always open in that little soft spot when Backstrom gets it on the goal line. And you know the play I'm talking about. It goes from the half wall from Carlson, who fakes like he's giving it to Ovi across the box, but then he passes it down low. And then Oshie is just standing there on the hash mark, somehow wide open. And you realize it's because they're so worried about that shooting threat. And now I know Ovi's a freak and his shot is different than everybody else's, but you bring Gostisbehere back into the lineup, and now all of a sudden you've got to respect his shot because he's got a big shot. And, that gives Voracek more time. That gives Giroux more time. Konechny, everybody all of a sudden has more time because you are thinking about that big shooter. Now, I do think Gustafson can move the puck well. I think the power play puck movement is one of his strengths. He's very smooth. I've even heard a couple of comments from some of the players on the team about just how smooth he is and how he's been in practice and training camp and early in the season. I know we're still early. It's only been a few games, but I think the power play will be okay. I think you got too many good players. You got a couple of new guys on the back end that can run it a little bit. Van Riemsdyk seems to be finding the back of the net this year, which, I mean, this is a guy who he could score 30 goals in a 56-game stretch. Like, when he scores in bunches. I mean, I think he's got 5 points now on the season already in 5 games or something like that. So, it'll be interesting to see how this thing plays out with Gostisbehere and how this goes down, because I think that, especially when it comes to the power play, if he's feeling confident, he changes the game, and he changes the whole, way their teams kill penalties and the way that their power play operates.
Yeah. And did you think anything about the PK? I mean, the power play, I agree with you, right? It's like they kind of work their way through, and it's kind of like picking off where they left off last season, because they didn't actually finish with a great power play either. But the PK seems to be, I don't want to say completely ineffective, but so far, I mean, at the times that they have had to come up big, they kind of haven't. Do you think that that's a personnel issue? Because I don't really think it is. It seems to me more just like getting in front of pucks, just like simple block shots. Just, not overcommitting to certain things. Have you noticed that from the PK?
I'll tell you the biggest thing I've noticed. I've noticed a couple of little details, the way guys' sticks have been positioned. I see the puck getting through the dangerous areas on the power play too easily. Normally you can count on really good stick position from guys like Oscar and Lotz and some of these other penalty kill, Couturier. They are able to dictate what the power play does to an extent because of the way they're all synced up with their stick position. And that's been an area that I have not loved in their game so far this year, is giving up some of those lanes and some of those angles that some of these guys are really good at. And that's a small details thing that this coaching staff will see quickly and will address. And, I think you'll start to see that improve pretty quickly.
Okay. So yeah, it doesn't sound like you're too concerned with the special teams. I guess
I'm not, here's the thing.
Yeah.
I'm not concerned with anything yet because it's too early in the season. And I know it's a short season, but as long as you're not 0-12, you're going to have a chance, right? Like to stay competitive. And every team works out their kinks differently. The Flyers have had some injuries early on, which has thrown some things off. You've got Couturier who comes out. It's just, look, you got a couple of guys that are scoring a lot of goals. You've got Oscar back. You've got Nolan Patrick back, who, is a story. And I'm not there yet. I still kind of trust what they're doing, and trust that they have a plan to address some of these areas. So I'm not throwing my hands up just yet.
I love that confidence. I feel a very similar way. It's all about just watching them work through that process. You brought up Nolan Patrick, and I think it would be appropriate to talk about him. And I want to talk about that line in general, this Nolan Patrick, Lindblom, TK line. We'll see how long it stays together. But what do you think about Nolan Patrick so far in the small sample size? He was held out of practice for the day, but I think it was more of a maintenance day. It's first time in a while. Give him an extra day off, let him recover type of thing. What do you think about Nolan Patrick, and what do you think about that line in general, and not just for this year, but maybe moving forward in the future?
Well, this is really my first time really getting to watch him closely, because he was drafted before I was like on the team. I didn't know his story like you guys did, right? So then he got injured during my first year. He got, and that was kind of, we didn't see him a lot. He was kind of still a young guy, kind of figuring it out a little bit. So, so far I've been impressed with his game. I really have. But I love the pace that he plays with. It's very noticeable. And I watched him make a play on, I think it was Travis Konechny's breakaway goal, where he won a puck battle on a back check, and it was a second effort. He used his skates and his stick to defend, and he makes a quick reverse up the wall, and then Lindblom makes a great play too. And I said, wow, I like that. That reminded me, the way he got up and down the ice on that shift reminded me of like a 20-year-old Tyler Seguin. So, and then I'm like, I'm just kind of watching how he sometimes skates with one hand, and he does that sort of hop crossover when he wants to get his feet going. And I'm like, geez, this kid really does remind me a little bit of Seguin, the way he and look, he's oozing with skill. That's obvious. So, if he learns how to really get in those dirty areas, you're never going to score a ton of goals from the perimeter, although he does have a good shot. But if he learns how to get into the, into those harder areas like Seguin did, he's going to be a good player. I've really liked what I've seen. I think the team's going to have to manage him this year, just because, he hasn't played a lot of hockey. And I think I saw today they kind of gave him a maintenance day, and he kind of just did some skill work, which, like, again, I don't think that's a bad idea. Like, I think he's a special case. You have to manage him, and you have to sort of watch him and think about the long haul with him. But, I think, again, he certainly easily looks like a top 9 NHL forward. Like, with his eyes closed at this point, he kind of looks that way. So I'm happy to see it. And I'm still learning about the player. Like, I haven't seen enough of him. And he was so young when I saw him a little bit, that I'm just not ready to make a full assessment on him, say he's a star, say he's not a star, any of that. But I've liked what I've seen so far, and I'm sort of looking forward to getting to know his game a little bit more throughout this season.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. What do you think about that line of Lindblom, Patrick, and TK? They've kind of been together. We've seen them under prior to you being here. Hackstall used it a little bit back in the day. On paper, growing them together, right? They're all built from within. It makes a ton of sense. Obviously, there's other guys that can mix in there. Maybe Farabee lines up really nicely with that group as well. Maybe even a guy like Frost. But what do you think about the that combination of three players? Do you think on paper, do you see the same thing? And are you seeing it on the ice?
Yeah, geez, I love the line because every line Oscar Lindblom plays on seems to do well.
Sure.
He's got so many good habits in his game. I mean, he really does, and it's interesting. Like all the good Swedish players have the greatest habits. They
so true.
They stop on pucks. They finish their checks. Their stick positioning is so good. I mean, the way Oscar gets his feet around the puck, the way he feels pressure. I mean, he's very good on the wall. He knows when he needs to drop down and support, or when he needs to play a little bit higher to push the coverage out and not let the defense, condense the zone as much. So, boy, I love his game. He knows what he's doing back there, or excuse me, up on the walls. And Konechny, I mean, look, the kid's a goal scorer. He can skate. He plays with an. I mean, it's a perfect line when you really look at it. So they could really overwhelm you with their speed. I know Oscar might not be quite as fast as the other two, but I like it. I do. I mean, there's a lot to like, and if that line is in your top 9, and you look at who the other 6 forwards are. In theory, you've got 3 of the better lines in this league. You really do.
Absolutely. Yeah, when that top 9 is healthy, it is a scary combination of talent and balance. And like you said earlier, JVR, I don't want to say he looks like a different player. He looks like the player that I know him to be, the one that he was 2 years ago. He's definitely still a goal scorer. And the fact that he's got a resurgence and Farabee looks better, again, it's a very dangerous crop of forwards. So let's go to the last position here, because I would actually argue it's been a strength, whether the numbers reflect that or not. But the Flyers team defense has been dramatically worse than it was at the start. I don't want to say start of last year, but last year overall. They didn't start great last year either. It took them time to kind of work through it. They lost to a non-NHL team in the preseason. This stuff kind of happens. But goaltending, we saw Carter Hart, I don't want to say have a meltdown, because I don't see it as a meltdown. I just saw it as a frustration moment, and I get it. It seemed to me like AV kind of left him in the game. And I
there you
I would
go.
like to hear that. I would like to hear your opinion. Well,
yeah,
I was going to say, it seemed to me he did that on purpose. And he did it on purpose to say, hey, I'm not going to bail you out of this one and put Elliott in. And I don't know if that's necessarily against Hart. It seemed more against the team to kind of be like, hey, I'm not going to switch the goalie and switch the momentum on you. You guys have to figure it out. That was kind of the message that I got from AV to more, I don't want to say leave him high and dry, but I think he wanted them to, kind of feel the pain of that loss, if that makes sense. At least that's what I took away.
I think you nailed it. He definitely left him in there to send a message, and to the team a little bit, but I think to the goaltender too. Like, I don't think when you have a veteran backup, there's a certain mutual respect between a veteran and a veteran, right? And so I think he kind of felt like, you know what? I just did this to Brian the other night against Buffalo, and you bring in a 30-plus-year-old goaltender that's not supposed to play. I mean, with no morning skate. It's just
good point.
I think there was a respect factor on Elliott. I think there was a learning moment for Hart. I think it was a button-pushing moment to the team. Like, very calculated decision in many areas, which – that's a veteran move. I'm not saying whether I think it works out or not, because I don't know the answer to that question. It's too early to tell. AV has a record of doing very well early in his tenure in a lot of places, and then, potentially things trailing out a little bit. And I'm not suggesting that's where we're at, because we're only in year 2, but it hasn't even really been a full one season when you look at the amount of games played. So, he hasn't even had 2 full training camps. So, I think it was a message, and I think it was a message to Carter that he's got to play better. And I'm not just going to throw Brian Elliott and hang him out to dry. You're still the kid. And, you know, I think that it remains to be seen how the group reacts. I think they're fighting a little bit of an uphill battle right now because they're down a couple of bodies. That's going to be this year. Someone's always going to have COVID. There's always going to be injuries. I mean, it's going to be a wild year. Washington's without their top 4 best players right now. You know, Columbus has got the player Line they just traded for. He can't even get into the country right now. So there's a lot of things happening. So, you know, that's why I keep saying I'm not. The early part of this season is going to be a little bit of a shit show because everything is so unorganized and still chaotic. I mean, the games look chaotic. They do not look like, you know, NHL games that are, they're just not quite there. I mean, they're a tick off right now, which is to be expected because preseason is usually 6 games. So, right. You know, 3 games for a vet, maybe 4. So, you know, there's still a lot left to be desired.
Yeah, and not only that, the season doesn't start with so much intensity. And I get it that there's obviously a gear change from preseason to regular season. You always see it. You know, you'll see some kid kind of blow everybody out of the water in preseason, and then they get to the regular season, it just crickets, you know, because the intensity level obviously increases. But I think with the schedule, without that, I think a lot of teams, you know, the ones that came up and are hungrier as a unit. And again, I never pick on anybody individually because the idea of an NHL player being lazy and not wanting to win, it's just in my mind, it doesn't compute. I'm like, it's
a non-starter.
Exactly. That's like, we're not talking about NHL caliber, even pro hockey players. We're talking about average human beings at that point, and that's not really what we're talking about. But what I do see is sometimes I see, like, is that team coming out with a determination as a group, as a unit? Do they make a decision to win? And again, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not a professional athlete. I've never been one. But I look at the decision that AV made, and we go back to what we were talking about earlier. He called out Kevin Hayes, a guy who leads the team in points. Offensively, he's doing a lot. I don't want to say he's playing out of position, but he is, in a sense. He's playing Couturier's role as well and still excelling offensively. But defensively could look a little bit better. The team overall, he's kind of pushing those buttons to get a little bit more out of him, right? Do you think that somebody like Kevin Hayes, do you think he called him out on purpose because he has a history with Kevin from New York?
Totally. I mean, I think that, you know, sometimes when you want to get a loud message across, you got to go after the biggest bully in the schoolyard. And I'm, you know, like, whoa, it's like he just went after Hazy. You know what I mean? Like, if he goes after Van Riemsdyk or he goes after Voracek, it's old news. He's done that anyway. Like, that's normal. When things don't go right, those are his guys that he likes to get after. So, sorry, I'm just opening up
it's all good.
I guess you'd call it a Chex Mix, something like that. So
all good.
I think it was, he's doing it for a reason. Him and Hazy have a long relationship, but they had their moments in New York too. I mean, I remember when, you know, AV and him were in New York together. There were some moments of contention between the two of them, and AV calling Hazy out and saying he wanted more and saying, you know, if you want to play, you got to be better defensively because you're just not there yet offensively. So, you know, the one thing about AV that I respect is that he seems willing to kind of go after anyone. You know, I think sometimes for whatever reason he's gets a little stuck on certain guys undeservedly, but that's pretty normal. I think every coach I ever had guys like that. And you never wanted to be that guy, and sometimes I was, which was never fortunate.
Right.
Probably brought that upon myself, but yeah, I think he's going to probably, you know, pick on him a little bit and push him and want to see him better. And it's funny because I was watching the NHL channel today. I had it on quite a bit in the background, and Jarmo Kekalainen was on. And I don't know a ton about him, but I'm watching this interview and he's talking about Torts. And look, Torts is tough, but you always know where you stand, and he does it to your face. A lot of these managers, coaches, whatever, like, they do it behind your back. They sit in the coach's room and they shred you, but Torts is going to tell you right to your face, whatever he would say behind your back, it's right to your face. And, there's not a ton of that. So I feel like you got to respect it a little bit. And I hope that the Flyers players kind of feel that way about AV, that, look, I believe that what he's saying it to my face. And I feel better about that rather than having him say it to the GM behind my back and in a meeting with the pro scouting staff and whatnot. So I think that's something that can be interpreted in multiple ways, but hopefully, in the right way.
Yeah, and I think he is very selective with who he calls out. And I think we see stuff like I brought this up earlier on the phone to Jamie Bascow when I was on the phone with him, talking about back in the day, Dave Haxtell, he would consistently defend Brandon Manning and then like throw somebody like TK under the bus publicly. And I think the reason they do that, right, is like it's almost like a sense of expectations. Like somebody like Kevin Hayes, I think AV knows kind of what we were talking about. And I think he expects a certain response from Hayes. And I think he expects to translate that. Like back in the day, and I think you'll probably remember this because you grew up a Flyers fan, Keith Primo with Ken Hitchcock. And I remember when Primo was gone, it was like Ken Hitchcock's voice just disappeared from the locker room, at least from the fan public eye. And how big of a connection like somebody like Keith Primo was to the team, translating somebody like Hitchcock, who's, very, I don't want to say a perfectionist. I don't know him personally, but from what I understand, very rigid, defensively oriented, right? He's kind of stuck in his ways. So it's really important to have a guy like Hayes, and Hayes is kind of like a big personality as well. Do you think that somebody like Kevin Hayes can handle this and kind of turn it into fuel and kind of bring the locker room together? I think he did a really good job of that last year.
That's exactly what his personality is. Mm-hmm. When a coach challenges him, he gets pissed.
Yeah.
He's like MFing you under his breath. And he's like, I'll show you. Like that's kind of, right. Kevin Hayes is from Dorchester, Massachusetts. And he didn't grow up with a swimming pool and a tennis court, out in Brookline. So he's a tough kid, Kevin Hayes. He's a very, very tough kid. His brother Jimmy's tough. Mm-hmm. His father, Kevin Sr., he's tough. His mother is tough. His sisters are tough. I mean, like, they're he's going to rise to the occasion. He's a guy who's going to take it. He's going to use it as fuel. He does bring the locker room together because he's such a fun guy. I think he's fun to be around. He's been really good for Nolan Patrick, who lives with him. He's been really good, a really good role model for him. So
that's awesome. I actually did not know that he was living with him, but I love to hear that kind of stuff because I think that is truly important and shows why he has an A on his chest. So I totally agree. So I got a couple more topics here. You did bring up Line A and Dubois. I want to talk about it at the end, but I think it's important to talk about it now because this is, this was kind of a very narrative-driven type of trade, like almost like I saw the Dubois shift. The situation with Line A, and I was like, this is going to happen. Obviously not 100%, but I was like, it only makes sense logistically. The two teams need to get a trade like this done. When you see this type of trade, and you see a guy like Dubois, who normally outside of that shift, I've never seen anything wrong with him as a player, as far as from shift to shift. And like you said, Torts is a tough guy. I'm sure it's somewhat personal over there to some degree. I don't know if it's Torts or just management in general. But also, Line A wants out. What do you think about that situation? This kind of swapping problems, if you will, elite problems. But what do you take away from that? Do you think either team kind of won out, or you think it's kind of like time will tell? The way I see it is I don't know if Line A is even going to stay in Columbus at the end of the day. And it reminds me of the Jeff Carter trade where they might end up losing twice on that one.
Yeah, I mean, Line A is one of those guys who's like a pure goal scorer. There's only a few of them, maybe they're like those elite quarterbacks in the NFL. Only about half the teams know who their quarterback's going to be every year for the next 10 years. And the other half of the league is kind of, is there something else out there that could potentially be better? So, So if Line A stays around and signs an extension in Columbus, I mean, you're not going to go wrong with Patrick Laine on your team. He can score goals. I mean, as good as anyone. So, the other guy, Dubois, he's still young. He's obviously a big player with a lot of skills. I don't really hold against what happened. That shift, kind of looked like he was mailing it in a little bit. I don't know. I mean, sometimes on a shift, there's not a lot happening. I don't see that shift and say, oh, forget it. This kid, he's an asshole or whatever. I don't go there. That kind of coaching style is not for everyone. He didn't seem to want to give a reason as to why he wanted out, but I think it's a good trade. I think one of the biggest, kickers will be how does Roslovic, how does that work out? Is he going to step up and be a really good center for them? Kekalainen said on NHL Network today they're going to let him play center, which is something he really wants to do. Never really got a chance to do that in Winnipeg. So, or not as much as he would have liked maybe. I'll be honest, I don't watch a ton of Winnipeg usually until the end of the year. I've done a couple of their games in the playoffs, but those late Central starts don't do it for me. And yeah, I mean, look, I think it's an interesting thing you bring up because you say they're kind of trading problems, but I don't know if either guy's really like a problem type of player, but you're right. Columbus's track record hasn't been great keeping players. So I don't know. I feel like Laine is the type of player you can give a lot of money to, though, like a lot. I mean, he's going to score 30 goals for the next 10 years, probably. I mean, that's worth a lot of money, right?
That's true. And I don't think he's ever hit less than 30 goals since he's been in the NHL. So he's not necessarily a guy whether you question he can do his role, right? And if his role is to score goals, he can definitely be relied upon. Do you think his, let's say, shortcomings, because I don't really know what his shortcomings are. He's very talented. So, these could be addressed over time. But do you think he'll mix in with Torts?
It's always, I mean, I have no, like, I can't tell you I have no idea. I mean, go to a casino and frickin' guess red or black on a roulette wheel, man, on a roulette wheel. I mean, it's a toss of the dice because I have a friend, Cam Atkinson, who plays there.
Yep. Of course.
So we played hockey together growing up, and we're always weddings together and bachelor parties and this and that. And he loves Torts. And a couple of years ago, he was on the fourth line doghouse with Torts. So it's not always been sunshines and rainbows for Cam, but he loves him. He really does. I mean, I believe that he would be devastated if Torts were to ever get fired from that team. So, and that's a goal scorer right there. I mean, that's a guy who's not known for being physical and playing a lot of defense. So
absolutely.
I think again, with Torts, it's about effort. And if he decides you're not giving effort, you're screwed. But if he thinks you're giving effort, you might have a moment with him here and there, but Werenski likes playing for him. I mean, it's just there's a lot of players really like playing for him. So, Joan, I mean, there's as many that like playing for him as that don't.
Yeah. And I totally can see that. And personally, I've obviously never played at any level close to that, but from what I've seen about Tortorella, it seems to be the type of guy that I probably would like to be coached by. I tend to like everything, really bluntly. So I could see it. I only say that, right, because you see Laine's problem. Again, I don't even really know what the problem was, right? I think maybe it's just maybe not enough spots there. Maybe the fact that Laine will be the big selling ticket there is enough. Like maybe that's kind of what Laine was looking for is, not being on a team where he's the second line goal scorer. Maybe he wants to be, top billing, and maybe it's kind of an ego thing. Do you think that has anything to do with it?
I can't tell you one way or the other because I don't know him personally. I just look, Winnipeg's also not maybe the easiest place to play. You know what I mean? You're in that Canadian market. You're in Although, coming from Finland, you'd think Winnipeg would be like the most similar place in America to Finland, right? So, so
well, I know it's a tough room though in general. I remember the story with Bufflin back in the day and Evander Kane, and they like threw his clothing in the shower, because he wouldn't conform. So I think maybe it's not. Maybe it doesn't allow for more personalities. You know what I mean? Like LA, for instance.
I was talking to Nate Thompson the other day, who said he really likes it. He said the group is good. He said the team is tight. And he says he thinks that he thinks they're a good team this year too. So
that's probably just too much looking into it. Honestly, it's probably too much just a media angle. Because as far as I'm concerned, it's employment. Sometimes you're not happy where you're employed, like you said, where you're living.
Listen, it's no different than anything else in the world, right?
Right.
So
absolutely.
Well, I'd have loved to see Line A in Philadelphia. He'd have looked good wearing a Flyers jersey, and I probably would have been willing to give up more than most people would be happy to hear me say, because you need a guy like that. I mean, he could be bad for 57 minutes in a hockey game, and he could score 2 goals. You know what I mean? Jeff Carter had those nights.
Yes,
he had those nights.
Carter was a good defensive player, though.
Yeah, but he had nights where you just didn't notice him for 55 minutes. And he scored 2 goals. And he only, in 4 minutes, you'd notice him and he'd get 2. I mean, he was that good of a shooter.
Yeah, he was.
The puck got on his stick in a certain area. And it was like you knew you were going to score.
Yeah, he had a really heavy snapshot. I remember that. Very rare.
Oh, my God.
Very, very rare heavy.
Heavy.
Yeah. Awesome.
Oh, my God.
Shot. Yeah, I miss Jeff Carter. All right, so we're getting close to the hour here. I do want your opinion on two more things here. So real quick, just for anybody who's not aware, we talked about this a little bit before, Colby. NBC, looks like NBC Sports and NBC in general to some degree will be changing. The Flyers apparently will no longer be on there. Hockey will no longer be on there. What is your take on that, Colby? What do you think about the whole situation with NBC and how things are changing for streaming and what?
One distinction to make is we're talking about NBC Sportsnet.
Yep,
we're not talking about NBC Sports Philly.
Okay. Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. So NBC Sportsnet, which is out of Stamford, Connecticut, they do the national games, right? Mm-hmm. They're gonna fold that channel up and the golf channel as well into USA Network. USA Network has more subscribers than NBC Sports, so they're gonna call it quits. They own USA Network. They're gonna show stuff on USA Network, and the big game will still be on NBC 10, right, on the national NBC. So nothing will change with any of the RSNs, the regional networks. So, NBC Philly, NBC Chicago, Boston, Washington, whatever, you name it. So it's interesting, though, because that's hockey was sort of their flagship sport on there. And it kind of makes you wonder what's going to happen with the next TV deal if they're going to be telling the NHL, well, you're going to be on USA Network, or for the finals, we'll put you on NBC 10 and streaming. And is that really what the NHL is looking to sign up for? I don't know. That makes me think that there's probably pretty strong indications that hockey is going to end up on some other networks. It might have something on NBC, but it's going to be on other networks. And NBC felt, all right, well, then this is what we're going to do if we're not going to, just be the ones that own hockey. That's my thought.
Yeah, that's a pretty good breakdown. And I've been talking about how I expect changes with all the COVID stuff, that I kind of expected changes for streaming. So maybe this will end up in for the better at the end of the day. But it's unfortunate. So much churn and all this stuff, it's unfortunate. The changes always make me uncomfortable with this type of stuff just because what happens to everything around it. But I thought it was interesting and something that people should be aware of rolling into next season.
Well, and you've obviously seen all of the differences in the home and local broadcast.
Obviously.
you've got a bunch of different people. Obviously they let a bunch of us go or didn't renew our contracts. You've got JJ and Keith Jones calling games from Wells Fargo Center that are taking place elsewhere. So one analyst on the show, which is tough. I mean, only having one analyst on a pre and a post game show for an hour, it's hard. I mean, you really need another analyst to really play off of and work off of. You're not, in my opinion, you're not really giving the guys on there a chance to be successful. I just think you're kind of setting the show up for failure, in my opinion. But hey, it is what it is, and obviously they're doing it for whatever their reasoning is, and
Yeah, I'm sure they have their reasons. Corporate America always does. All right, so let's end on this note. The Flyers, as we record this, the Flyers are going to be going up against the New Jersey Devils by the time that this airs. It'll be the day of the game. How do you see the Flyers matching up against the Devils? They've been red hot. Jack Hughes is on fire, which I'm not surprised about. I don't know why people are surprised. He's a former first overall pick. But Jack Hughes is on fire. New Jersey probably improved mostly because it's the beginning of the season. I don't expect them to be in one of the top tier teams in the division. It could be wrong. But how do you see the Flyers matching up going in against the Devils next game? Do you think they rebound?
Well, the Devils are, playing in front of a new coach that none of them had a preseason to try to show them what they could do. So you've got a bunch of guys in the Devils that are basically still auditioning every day for their spots in the lineup. So they've got a little extra jump probably that other teams don't have, with no fans and whatnot. So I think that's part of the factor in Jersey. And I think, some of their young players, like you mentioned, Hughes is starting to look like a pretty good player. Last year he looked a little, not like he didn't look quite strong enough to play at this level, or to at least be dominant at this level, we'll call it. So, look, I think the Flyers can match up with anyone. I think even down a little bit. I don't know. Did they say who's playing in goal? Is Elliott starting?
Yeah, it should be Elliott. Yep.
He's been good when called upon. For sure. So I think he should be good. And, hopefully they'll get their game going a little bit. I mean, they got some good news with Couturier's back out on the ice pretty quickly, which is obviously a good sign. I look, it's such a crapshoot this year because we really don't know who teams are yet. I don't think the Flyers really have their identity yet. I don't think the Devils do either. So I would not put it to you this way. I certainly wouldn't bet on a lot of hockey right now. Like, I think it's a little too, sporadic for me. Harder to really find any patterns this early in the season. So, hey, I'll have the game on just like you, and I'll know after probably the first 20 minutes how the game's going to go.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, hopefully the Flyers rebound. I agree. They do match up against any team, and even without players in the lineup, I still expect a strong performance. If you're going to lose, you're not supposed to lose like that. But it happens. Like you said, I just expect a response, and this team has been very good at responding. So I do expect a response. I expect a solid one. I expect to go to sleep happy, but we'll see. All right. Colby, thank you so much. Where can people to follow you? You're still on Twitter. I know you're still tweeting and everything. Anywhere else people can follow you in your, kind of hockey journey at this point?
Yeah, well, obviously Twitter, like you said, but I will be doing hopefully some NCAA tournament not too far out in the future. I mean, the NCAA tournament in previous years has been in, I guess actually not till the last week of March. So what are we? We're coming up just about on February. So yeah, about 2 months, a little more than 2 months. We'll start hopefully that NCAA tournament and the Frozen Four with ESPN. So. But, with today's world, who the hell knows if they'll have a tournament and what it'll look like and this and that. So we'll keep you posted if anything comes up for sure with any broadcasting, opportunities and whatnot. But I think you'll probably just hear me jumping on people's podcasts here time to time when they ask me to. And, you know, like I said, well, when the phone rings, the phone rings. It's free agency, right?
I like that. I like that when the phone rings. All right. Well, I think that's a good way. And like I said, I'll have you back on and, we'll catch up with you where you go in the future, but, been awesome. Thank you so much. The conversation is always good with you. I like it, quite a bit, especially about hockey, for sure. So thank you for joining. Thank you everybody for listening. It's been much appreciated. For those who are not aware, I do have a new podcast coming out, new type of show. I haven't officially announced it yet, but I might as well announce it here. It's called Always Level Up. It's about overcoming failure and perseverance. My first episode is with Lisa Ann, the ex-adult film star and XM fantasy football host. She was awesome. So look out for that. I'll be making an official announcement, but otherwise subscribe, like everything, any kind of purchasing, any kind of support has been amazing. So thank you everybody for listening. We'll check in with you next week, and remember to always stay gritty.